Yeah, and one of the symptoms that are just so prevalent, and you've got this diet, and now semaglutide and the weight loss drugs, and everyone is trying to tackle the weight loss. We didn't have obesity at the rates we do now 50 years ago. Japan doesn't have the obesity rates that we have. What is going on? It's not that we're losing willpower. In fact, I think women today
Willpower has increased.
more, right? And we're eating
Yeah.
less, moving more, and we have gotten ourselves into a spot where we can't eat any less, and we
Yeah.
can't move anymore, and we can't do anymore. And it's just that's not the issue. The weight gain is a symptom
Yeah.
of a bigger root cause. And I would even go so far as saying, well, if your liver's backed up, your lymphatic drainage isn't working, right? We're talking about the bathtub that is the pipes are clogged. And what happens when your lymph is backed up? You get puffy. You get swollen. You can't take your rings off. You have this belly fat that's not really fat, and that's why it is important to actually use a body composition scale versus just the
Yeah.
scale in the bathroom. You could gain 5 pounds just from water weight, the moon, constipation, lymphatic drainage issues, your liver being backed up, all of that. I mean, every time I do a liver flush, the scale goes down a couple pounds just in the water that my
Yeah.
body is letting go. Now, that water is going to come back, but that's showing that it's releasing, because anywhere there's toxins, it's going to hold on to extra fluid.
Yep.
And as you release the toxins, your body says, oh, now I feel safe to release the fat and the excess water and the inflammation that has been holding those extra toxins. So this is just one more example of toxicity causing weight gain. Now, there's a whole lot more that goes on there because the toxicity is backing up the liver. So can you talk about weight loss and the liver and that connection?
Absolutely. So there's so much to be said about that. And with people who've gone down the liver cleansing rabbit hole, we'll say, I've gotten a lot of feedback from people who were able to lose a lot of weight quickly when they were totally stuck. They were totally plateaued and they didn't make any changes with their diet because what you alluded to is very correct. And when I first got into a clinical setting working with people, you had two different types of weight loss cases. Some people are trying to lose like 60, 80, 100 pounds. They've been overweight their whole life. And, there's processed foods, there's trauma, there's emotions. There's so many things that go into that symptom of weight gain. But the more befuddling thing to me was the person who's eating all organic. They've got a personal trainer. They are actually eating fewer calories than they were in their 20s, right? So they're eating less than they were. And they've got they're always complaining of 5, 10, 15 extra pounds that they can't lose. And really a body composition problem. Like they don't like the way that they're fitting into their clothes. They don't like the way they're looking. And I really didn't understand it completely. And then I learned about the bioenergetic theory and this issue with caloric restriction, not really addressing the root cause, increasing cortisol, shutting down your thyroid. And then so we have this issue of people who have more inflammation, tend to be on thyroid medications, and then they're trying to do these really extreme restrictive diets just to manage the situation, but they're really just doing symptom management. And down the road, it gets a little bit dubious and frightening in some ways because you just restrict more and more and more, and you have nowhere to go. The body doesn't feel safe. So, all right, let's talk about the liver. So I'll give a few different perspectives as to what the liver does. I'll give a little Chinese medicine perspective, Ayurveda, Western physiology. So the Eastern systems have a more holistic interpretation of these organ systems and what it means on a metaphysical level, what it means in terms of its relationship to other things in the body. So that's an important perspective. So Chinese medicine says that the liver is a key regulator of metabolism. It says that, or maybe one of the most key things it says is that the liver ensures the smooth flow of qi throughout the body, right? And so qi is basically energy, right? But it goes beyond physical energy. It's emotional energy, and it's also moving the blood. So a big part of weight gain is emotional stagnation, right? And we could call that trauma, or we could just call it unresolved emotions, leading to this chronic elevated cortisol response, which is one of the key mechanisms behind people having extra weight and having extra inflammation. And so one of the things you get from liver cleansing, and I'd say actually maybe the primary thing as it relates to chronic disease, is a relief from these negative emotional states, right? More of an emotional ease. And I would say that was the number one thing for me, because frustration, anger, irritability, these things can cause illness, but I also think they're a result of chronic illness, because people are spinning their wheels. They don't know how to get better. And so they build up these negative emotions, which sort of compounds the chronic illness cycle. And so by clearing the liver, decongesting the liver, you bring more emotional ease into your body, right? So they're talking about the smooth flow of qi. They also said that the liver governs your tendons and your joints. And so just for flexibility and inflammation, cleansing your liver is really important. It's also really related to the hips and the knees. So if you've got these chronic knee problems, hip problems, we got to look at the internal organs. And then on like a metaphysical level, the liver is related to governing your purpose, your goals, your dreams. And so if you want to achieve your dreams, if you want to have clarity of vision, Chinese medicine would say you have to have a strong, clear liver. So Ayurveda mirrors a lot of what Chinese medicine says about the liver, and then also says one really key thing. So they focus on the digestive strength, right? So Hippocrates said all disease starts in the gut, and Ayurveda and Chinese medicine were very clear about the importance of digestion for overall good health. And so the liver and the bile that's secreted from the liver plays a really big role in your metabolism of food, right? So turning food into energy, that's your metabolism. That's your oxidation rate. As the liver slows down or becomes really just congested and toxic, the rate at which you convert food into energy slows down. Your metabolism slows down. So Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, they were extremely clear. The liver is the key regulator of metabolism. It's the fire element in Ayurveda. And it's related to things like weight gain, PMS, irritability, headaches, so many different things, overall inflammation. And then both of them talk about it also being very important as a detox organ, right? And so we have this big problem, which we'll get to in a moment here, with these estrogen mimicking compounds, which are just one subset of the toxins that are coming in, but they play a big role in the overall weight gain crisis. So we got Western physiology, which is not as holistic in its view, but it's very exhaustive, right? They said the liver has over 500 vital functions. And when I studied physiology in graduate school, and specifically like nutritional biochemistry, you realize that it all goes back to the liver, right? Fats, carbs, and proteins, basically all the food you eat, they're metabolized in the liver, which the layperson doesn't really know. It's like, okay, it's metabolized somewhere in the gut, but really all of that is going on in the liver, right? So your metabolism is your liver. If you're complaining of, oh, I have more of a sluggish metabolism, it's not as fast as it was in his 20s, a way to reframe that is that your liver is slowed down, right? It's not functioning as well and it's congested, and that's not going to necessarily show up on a blood test, right? ALT, GGT, ALK-Phos, these liver enzyme readings, they're not super useful for understanding actually the health of your liver, and they really only shoot up during viral infections, acute stress, alcoholism, things like that, or some sort of late stage problem. So we can't rely on those necessarily. Obviously, the liver is very important with detox and Western physiology. 80 to 95% of fat soluble toxins are, hold on, let me just move this. Got a little bit of light in my face. 80 to 95% of fat soluble toxins are bound to bile. And these are the toxins we're worried about. These are the plastics, the mycotoxins, the metals, the chemicals, the ones you hear about in the news and you're told to avoid. We have a system for getting them out of the body, but most people's systems of excretion, their elimination organs, everything has slowed down. So you begin to accumulate waste. And again, one of these things that people are accumulating are these estrogen mimicking compounds. And so this is where we get into the issue of weight gain with people, right? So again, the picture I've sort of painted here is that your metabolism is your liver, right? If your metabolism is slowed down and you're eating fewer calories, you're exercising more, but you still don't have the body composition you want, you're putting your food or energy from food towards fat instead of, building muscle and just basically having the shape of the body you want, you have to look towards your liver. So there's a few sort of key mechanisms I see going on. And one of them has to do with these estrogen mimicking compounds in the environment. All right. So these are the plastics, these are the pesticides, And also, a lot of metals and chemicals are actually estrogenic in their chemistry when they enter into the body. So for women, this turns into all the things that are plaguing women: weight gain, inflammation, PMS, PMDD, PCOS, endometriosis, mood swings, all the things that you typically hear about and that women are very interested in. And for men, it just appears as low testosterone, essentially, right? Their testosterone's higher than their estrogen, but the estrogen's too high. So
Mhm.
the ratio becomes off. And so this just turns into like apathy for men, weight gain, relatively little drive in life compared to their earlier years. And so that's also a problem for men. So the body has a way of excreting these estrogen compounds. And we got to think of the total body burden, right? So as a woman, you naturally have estrogen that you're producing that you need. You have estrogen from food like flax and soy, and those are phytoestrogens. They're a little bit weaker, but they still add to our total body burden. But then we have this pollution crisis, right? And we have a lot of these plastics, pesticides. They're unavoidable in many ways. That they are unavoidable, and a lot of it's coming from the air we're breathing in. And so the liver is able to get rid of these estrogens through phase 2 of liver detox, glucuronidation, which essentially means the body takes vitamins, minerals, it attaches them to an estrogen compound, and either that is excreted through the kidneys or it is attached to the bile, goes into the small intestine, large intestine, and is excreted through the body. There are so many bottlenecks in people's elimination systems that what I just described is not actually happening if you are having these symptoms. If you have, and a lot of people will ask me, I mean, we're so far from what is like understanding what good health is that, I'll work with women and they'll ask me whether their severe PMS symptoms are normal. And I have to tell them, no, they're not normal, but they are typical. They are typical in this society. Is 5 to 10 pounds of weight gain normal? It's not a normal part of human physiology, but it's very typical. And it's basically an uphill battle to sort of go against that downward pressure of the toxicity that we're experiencing. So the big bottlenecks are that people don't have the right nutrition on board. Their phase 1, phase 2 detox doesn't have the right substrates and compounds to carry out those processes. People are mineral deficient, right? So they don't have, the copper, the iron, the zinc that's bound in the right proportions in their body, fueling the energy systems of the body and fueling the different organ systems. Bile, which is this substance that's so important for digestion, so important for fat metabolism, is sluggish and people aren't producing enough. And, people have bad dietary habits and they're eating too much, eating too late at night, snacking in between meals. And all this affect our secretion of bile. And then also we have a big issue with gut dysbiosis. So if you have gut dysbiosis and bacterial overgrowth, you're going to be producing a compound called beta glucuronidase. This goes into the system. The liver has to process it. It inhibits glucuronidation. So glucuronidation, again, is the process by which the body removes these estrogen compounds. So
Mhm.
this is why when you're working with someone, like the liver is key and then the gut's super key. Those are like the big two for the most part. You have to be working on them in tandem to get rid of this internal toxicity crisis. And one of the things I tell my followers online and my clients that a lot of the toxicity is actually coming internally. So once you have gut dysbiosis, every time you eat, there's a toxicity crisis
Right.
because the bacteria, the parasites, the candida, they're feeding off this undigested food. They're spewing off ammonias and aldehydes, and the food is putrefying and rancidifying and fermenting. So this creates a toxicity crisis that then the liver has to handle. But one of those main byproducts is beta glucuronidase. This shuts down the estrogen detox. So again, this total body burden of estrogen gets way out of control for people. They have all the symptoms we're talking about, including weight gain. And specifically, estrogen upregulates lipoprotein lipase, right? And so this is a enzyme that is responsible for pulling fat into cells.
Mhm.
Women naturally produce more of this enzyme because they have more estrogen, right? And lipoprotein lipase tends to pull more fat into the cells around the hips, the thighs, and the stomach, right? So women naturally hold a little bit more fat in those areas than men because they have this higher estrogen load as it is. When we get this estrogen body burden that's off the charts, the body composition starts changing in a way that is not desirable for a lot of women and men included, right? They're getting, weight gain in areas that they don't want. They're not fitting into their clothes the same way they want, even at the same level of calories. So
Right.
this has to be repeated over and over again. You can keep the calories the same, but if the liver keeps getting congested, you're going to have a body composition problem, which, to be honest, unless you go down the path of liver cleansing, is very difficult to fully get back to, right? If you want to if you're 50 and you want to go back to how your body responded in your 20s, I'm telling you, get on the liver cleansing now. You'll get there, but you got to get on it now because you need to renew your organs and decongest them and get your detox pathways going again. So that lipoprotein lipase plays an important role. As estrogen increases, we also see more water retention in the body, right? So higher estrogen is going to increase aldosterone activity, which is going to pull sodium and water into the body and into the cells. And so again, this is where you can see like the 3 to 5 pounds, 8 pounds of fluid retention. We might call it lymphatic congestion. We might call it puffiness, inflammation. It's really fluid retention. And again, at the same number of calories, you're still going to have this fluid retention, and it's going to be a body composition problem. So whether you're looking to lose 10 pounds of really stubborn weight or you're looking to lose 80 pounds of weight, you still have to focus on this problem of a bottleneck in the liver, too much estrogen in the body. So the estrogen plays a super, super key role. And then something that you've talked about really effectively over the years is the thyroid, right? And the connection between the thyroid and the liver. And so when you first learn that about 60%, maybe 80%, depending on what number you look at, of T4 is converted to T3 in the liver, I mean, that changes everything. It brings you into a more holistic view of the body because your thyroid problem is not just up here in your throat. It's the gut, it's the liver. So T4 is the inactive form of thyroid hormone. We need it to be converted to T3. If we have good levels of T3, we're generally going to have a pretty good metabolic rate, right? But if you're not making that conversion efficiently, you're going to have at least functional symptoms of hypothyroidism.
Mm-hmm.
And from my testing, doing hair tissue mineral analysis and mineral balancing, you kind of see that about 80% of people are in this slowed down metabolic state. Whether or not their laboratory numbers are fine as it relates to their thyroid, most people tend towards a hypothyroid state where they're a little bit more sluggish. They're spacier in their thinking. They tend towards constipation. They don't have as much zest, as much get up and go, maybe as they did when they're younger, right? So there's so much downward pressure from the toxicity that people tend towards a hypothyroid state. So most of that thyroid hormone is converted in the liver. About the other 20% is converted in the gut. So
right.
Between the liver and the gut, that's most of it. Some of it's converted in like the peripheral tissues, but that's a marginal amount. So as the T3 levels drop, right, and they're not penetrating the cells, then the metabolism slows down. The body temperature falls. The metabolic rate slows down, and you don't burn fat as effectively, right? So if you have a thyroid issue, you have to look at your liver, right? This is one of the things that is so overlooked in conventional medicine. It's recognized in functional medicine, but the question is what to do about it, right? I think you and I feel as though there's a couple of good techniques out there to help reverse some of this. And then one of the things that I learned in the past couple of years is, number one, cortisol is created when we're under stress. Cortisol obviously has a lot to do with our body composition and how much inflammation we hold, how much water weight we're holding on to. Cortisol has to be inactivated in the body. And I didn't know this until like 6 months ago, but 60 to 70% of cortisol is inactivated by the liver, right? So this constant irritability, this anxiety that exists in the body for people, right? Because a lot of people are dealing with an anxiety that is not just psychological.
No.
It's an irritation in their body. This is what I experienced after being exposed to mold. I mean, I had basically panic disorder, but it wasn't a psychological form of anxiety. It was in my body. It was irritation. And so as the liver gets really overwhelmed, you're creating a lot of stress hormones, but you can't break them down effectively. This is really what I think is like, from a Western physiology perspective, is leading to the sleep issues, where people wake up between 1 and 3 a.m. because they're still have this free floating cortisol. It doesn't allow them to get into a big parasympathetic mode or a really deep parasympathetic mode later at night. And again, is leading to sort of this low grade irritability, anxiety, and even depression that, to be honest, I think we see with most people the further you go down your health journey, you keep looking back and you're like, whoa, I was kind of anxious and depressed, right? It's just like this free floating anxiety and depression that a lot of people are dealing with. And so much of your emotional wellness, so much of your ability to go from parasympathetic to sympathetic efficiently, and then also make your way back, has to do with your liver health. And then also the liver plays a very important role in the efficiency of taking sugar from food and converting it to glycogen, and then taking glycogen and converting it back to blood sugar when the body needs it. So if the liver's working really well, the metabolic rate's up, you can go in between meals and feel pretty good. Your mental clarity is going to be good. Your physical stamina is going to be good. You're not going to have really bad blood sugar crashes, mood swings, food cravings. And that's a lot of what I experienced with chronic illness, is like your blood sugar is so off, right? And it's not easy to correct, right? You can eat more often throughout the day, but then you start overloading your digestion and you already have a slow metabolic rate. So that doesn't necessarily feel like the answer. And again, it goes back to this idea of cleansing. It really comes back to cleansing as a primary tool to recover your health. Because when the liver's working efficiently, you're going to have smooth control of your blood sugar. And as the liver becomes fatty due to undigested food, lots of refined sugars, lots of refined oils, unresolved emotions, stress, all of those things, it's harder for insulin to get into the liver, and the liver's not as sensitive to insulin. And then also the insulin's another hormone the liver has to break down. So if the liver can't break down the estrogen and the progesterone metabolites and the testosterone and the cortisol and also the insulin, we have this free floating insulin that's in the blood. So if you have a high fasting blood sugar and a high fasting insulin, this is also a liver problem.
Right.
Yes, it's a pancreas problem. Yes, it can be a lifestyle problem, an adrenals problem. The thyroid's all interrelated with this. But this, perhaps, the deeper I look into it, and just from my own personal experience, I think a lot of this has to do with the liver being the largest internal organ and being the key regulator of your metabolism, right? So that is the takeaway. It's the key regulator of your metabolism. So when liver function slows down and drops, we don't have as good control of our stress hormones and our stress hormone balance. We don't have as good of blood sugar balance. We can't get rid of the estrogen mimicking compound. So we have all these illnesses related to too much estrogen in the body. We don't have as much emotional wellness. And then we start to have these signs of metabolic syndrome, right? The blood sugar conversation, I think, is really misunderstood because people just think like, oh, someone has a blood sugar problem. That's because they're having too much sugar. They need to go on a low carb diet. They need to go keto. And like, yeah, you'll see that work for a small portion of the population. I don't know if it can really work long-term for most people. But it's not just a problem with the pancreas. It's not just a lifestyle issue. A lot of this has to do with a poorly functioning liver. And it's something that happened over time. And it's not something that people can necessarily account for, this sort of toxic load that's pressing down on them. But from my own experience, I mean, there's a lot